Hi, everyone. Thank you all for joining us today. I'll just give it a few minutes for everyone to come in. Before we start, I'd like you all to look out your window and tell me, what do you see? You can either put that in the chat or feel free to unmute.
Blue sky, sunshine.
Oh, you've got the same here, which is really lovely. I'm really excited to go outside for a walk after.
Same.
Some blue skies. That looks nice. Sun and clouds, trees. Oh, I'm very jealous about your cat. Oh. Well, I think we can get started. So I'd like you guys, thanks all for joining us today. And basically, we've got our guest speaker, Dr. Caitlin, who's here from Myota to help us explore a bit about the gut health and the brain, and what we eat can influence stress. And we'll look at practical ways to support stress resilience through gut health, including 6 simple tips that you can start using in your day-to-day life. So I don't know if you guys have been to our webinars before, but we're going to start with a few questions. So raise your hand, and how many of you want to understand the impact of gut health and that has on stress? Okay. And then how many of you want to learn more about gut health approaches to help manage stress? Nice. And last of all, how many of you don't want to understand the connection between gut health and stress and are not here to learn about gut-focused strategies? Nice. Okay. Well, before we get started, I would like to let you guys know that the session will be recorded, and at the end of the session or at the end of the day, you'll receive the recording in a newsletter just to allow other people who weren't able to attend to access the recording. And for those of you who don't know about us, a little bit of a summary. So we're the Stress Management Society, and it's a non-profit organization dedicated to help individuals and companies recognize and reduce stress. We are a small organization in West London, and we've been dedicated to a leading effective universal change with our passion to recognize and reduce stress and promote well-being. So, as you guys know, it's Stress Awareness Month, and this takes place every April since 1992. And this year's message is around awareness. So, not just awareness, but also action and what we can do to help build that change. So, which leads on to Be the Change, which is about helping people move from recognizing stress to responding to it with simple, meaningful actions. So, we don't want it just to be about understanding stress, but we want to help you do something about it. So it's moving from awareness to action. And the reason why we chose this theme is because basically, a lot of people have been feeling overwhelmed or out of control with everything happening at the moment. And many of us tend to wait for things to improve before we take that first step. So this is all about, taking that meaningful change. And for that to happen, it often starts internally. So in a world where everything can feel outside of our control, Be the Change is about starting where you are right now with one small action. So as you guys know, the Stress Management Society is a charity, and for every all these webinars and the resources to be for free, we believe everyone deserves access to mental health support. And if this is something that resonates with you, please consider doing a small donation to help us reach more people. Before we get started, I would encourage you guys to have your cameras on. This isn't a lecture, this is going to be an interactive webinar. And basically, a big thing for us this year is to try and rehumanize the workplace. So it would be great to have your cameras on, share things. We want to see your lovely faces and make this as interactive as possible. And feel free to unmute whenever and ask questions whenever you feel that you want to ask a question. And just a few ground rules for us. So it's important for you guys to be on time. So thanks for all being here on time. Also to be here in the now, limit distractions. So try and put your phones on mute or put them somewhere else where it won't be distracting you. And the other thing, participation. So whatever you put in, the more you put in, the more you'll get out. So please share your thoughts, share your ideas. That would be great. And it's important to kind of show honesty and respect for everyone. And kind of go in here with an open mind. Also, whenever you're trying to make a statement, it's important to use I statement. We don't want to assume things. So whenever you share something, it's best to use I. And then everything that kind of gets discussed in here we should try and keep in here. So just to maintain that confidentiality. And yeah, if you think of anything else, feel free to drop that in the chat. Okay, that's enough for me. I'm going to now hand over the mic to Caitlin, who's our guest speaker and is a trained neuroscientist and a registered dietitian.
Thank you so much. And yeah, it's so lovely to be here, particularly, in probably the most important month of the year for stress, being Stress Awareness Month. So I feel incredibly privileged to be able to be giving this talk, and also to be giving a talk on probably one of my favorite topics in the world, which is the gut-brain axis, which we'll dive into in a bit of detail this afternoon. But before I begin, I wanted to, I guess, share my own story around how I came to study the gut-brain axis, and particularly my interest in how stress and how diet are intricately linked together, and how we can improve our stress resilience through really simple daily habits that focus on gut health and focus on diet. So yeah, everything that what's been said, please do cut me off, ask questions. I do want this to be, as interactive as possible, and I'll also throw some questions out at everyone as well to get your perspectives too. But I guess my background came from being a dietitian back in Australia, and back then I was working in private practice, mainly in weight management settings. So looking at, prevention of things like diabetes, high cholesterol. And at the time, there was some really fascinating research, some really early research to show that if we focus on providing a really healthy gut environment, particularly increasing, the species of beneficial gut bacteria, then that can actually have really positive impacts on things like weight gain and weight loss. So essentially, the healthier your gut, often the better results we saw in clinic. And that's kind of all we knew. But that was enough for me to sort of roll with it and to say, okay, for all of the patients that I see, we are incorporating a gut health element into their dietary plan. So we'd be focusing on things like, fruits and vegetables, fiber, fermented foods. So all the things like, like kimchi, kombucha. So always focusing on a gut health element and not strictly focusing on, calories in, calories out. And after like a few months, this is where it became quite interesting, because the people that I was seeing that really embraced that, that gut friendly dietary component to what they were eating, they're the ones that were seeing improvements, not just on the weight loss side of things, but also in every other aspect of their life. They were feeling more calm throughout the day. They had more stress resilience. They were seeing improvements on things like mood and anxiety. And this fascinated me, right? Because this is such a clear indicator that what we eat doesn't just affect, our weight and our cholesterol and all of those things which we know, but it's also having a really strong impact on how we feel day to day. And that kind of prompted me to leave private practice and to go into research. So I joined a lab to do my PhD, looking at the role of our gut bacteria, looking at diet and how that influenced people's brains. So I joined a lab and it was about 20 people and they were all neuroscientists. So I was the only one who had come from sort of like a diet or nutrition related background. And at the first lab meeting, I came up and I sort of proposed the idea for my PhD. I was saying, I'm going to get a group of people, I'm going to put them into the MRI machine. I'm going to make them do different tasks and see how they perform on, fear and stress related tasks. I'm going to take a sample of their stool and I'm going to look at the relationship between their gut and also what's happening in their brain. And there was a bit of a silence in the room and everyone just, I could tell that they were laughing internally at what I was proposing, because the idea that the gut and the bacteria that we have in the gut could influence what we saw in an MRI, that was comical to them. It was a hilarious concept. But here we are, 10 years later, and the research has exploded in this area, and there is so much evidence to support the fact that our friendly gut bacteria can have huge effects on stress, on mood and anxiety. But also, and what I'll delve into a little bit later, is that relationship is two ways as well. So our stress can obviously affect our gut health too. Next slide. And I guess this is the idea that our gut and our brain are sort of intricately linked. It's not new to us, right? Like, it's deeply embedded in the way that we talk to each other and the experiences that we have. We have a gut feeling when we have intuition about something. You feel gutted if, you're really heartbroken about something, or you have knots in your stomach when you're nervous, or butterflies. But you also can trust your gut as well. You've got like intuition as well. And this is sort of the first place I wanted to start, is to open it to the floor, to, first of all, any questions that people have at this point, but also any sort of experiences or moments in time where someone has really like tangibly noticed that gut brain action, that gut brain connection in action. So I wanted to sort of open the floor to whoever wants to share an experience. No one wants to take the first plunge. Any
We've got
questions in the chat?
two people with their hands up. Nicolette, did I say your name right?
Oh, sorry, no, I think it's just that hand's just kind of left.
Oh.
It hasn't gone down. Sorry, no, I haven't got a question.
No worries.
Are there any other questions at this point? When I'm stressed, I do really get bad gut problems. Yeah, can definitely resonate with that. I guess what I wanted to cover in this talk is, I guess, the science behind it. So how exactly does our gut communicate with our brain and vice versa? What are the pathways that connect the gut and the brain? And also, finally, what are those really simple strategies that we can do in our everyday life that can support both our gut health and our stress resilience in a bi-directional manner? And then I will, at the very end, I wanted to talk a little bit about a study that I'm running at the moment, looking at that very impact and going into a bit of detail there. So there's no questions at the start. I might move on to the next slide. So I guess the way that I like to talk about the gut-brain axis is it's a two-way communication pathway. So the gut and the brain are like two best friends chatting away. I like to think of it, back in high school when, you'd be on the phone with your best friend and you're both kind of like shouting at each other at the same time. You're both sending messages in both directions. And that's exactly what's happening with our gut and our brain, is that our gut is continually firing messages to communicate and to update the state of the gut to the brain. And equally, the brain is also sending communication down to the gut. So it's a bi-directional relationship. One does not, exist without the other. And we know this. A really good example of this is stress. And it's such a pertinent topic because we are living in a stress epidemic in the UK right now. I think I don't need to tell anyone else in this group about that fact. I mean, I think in one of the most recent surveys, it was 81% of women felt, reported feeling overwhelmed or unable to cope due to stress. And it was about 67% of men. So they are not trivial numbers that we're talking about here. We also see a really strong correlation between prevalence of stress in the UK and also the prevalence of gut health conditions like irritable bowel syndrome and inflammatory bowel disease. And I guess if we're sort of to dive into that relationship with stress a little bit more in particular, I guess stress can be defined as, an acute threat to our safety. And we know that that shows both short-term and long-term effects on our whole gastrointestinal tract. So evolutionary stress is actually a really adaptive threat. It helps us escape from different threats in the environment by activating things like cortisol and adrenaline. So the obvious example that everyone uses is when you see a snake or a predator. So when our body senses that stress in the environment, it essentially turns off all the functions that we don't need. So all the blood is diverted away from those organs that we're not using at the time. You don't need to digest that pistachio croissant. It goes all to your limbs, to your arms, and to your legs. One of the key things that is switched off is our digestion. And this is a really energy intensive process for the body. So we don't need it at the time that we're seeing, that snake or that predator. We need those resources and that blood supply to go to different areas of the body, which will help us escape, like our muscles. The result is that this essentially shuts off digestion and your gut completely. It's saying, guys, shut it down. There's a crisis. And I guess that has a cascade of effects on the gut specifically. So the major effects that we see in the gut that come from stress are, first of all, alterations in gastrointestinal motility. So when we're talking about gastrointestinal motility, we're talking about the speed at which food and water move through the entire digestive tract. So we know that if you have a really slow gastrointestinal motility or intestinal transit time, you're more prone to things like constipation and bloating because things are completely slowed down. On the other breath, if you do have a really rapid intestinal transit time, that often relates to things like diarrhea. Both of those things can happen in a stressful situation depending on the individual and the person. The other things that happen in terms of gut physiology is an increase in visceral perception, change in gastrointestinal secretions, so meaning that you're not able to digest your food as effectively as you were before. There's also an increase in something called intestinal permeability. And a lot of people have heard of this concept before, referred to as leaky gut. Essentially, what that means is that we have a lining of cells around our gut where there's tight junctions between each of those gut cells. In a really stressful or heightened stress environment, we often find that the gap between those cells, that junction between those cells, begins to separate a little bit. And what that means is that things that should have stayed in the gut previously, so things like inflammatory cytokines or pathogens, they can sometimes travel through these barriers or these leaky gaps and sort of enter the body. And this can raise something like, inflammation throughout the body, which we know can have effects on, joints, on, different organs, and most importantly for this conversation, inflammation can have an effect on the brain as well. That's kind of one side of the story, right? But there's also the other side, is that if you do have an unhealthy gut, that's obviously going to send signals to the brain. So there's that top-down response that if we're really stressed, shuts off digestion. But there's also the reverse interaction. If your gut is, not feeling well, if you're, you have an infection or a parasite, that also is going to impact things from the bottom up. So from your gut to your brain. And there's some really interesting research around this area to show that, if you look at people who have inflammatory bowel disease or someone who has a gut infection, often they have higher incidences of things like stress and anxiety and low mood. They also have higher levels of things like inflammatory markers in their blood as well. I realize I've just thrown a whole lot of information in one go. I wanted to pause here just to see if there were any questions from the audience about anything that I've talked about so far. We're all still. We're all still. Everyone's happy? Perfect. In that case, I might move on to the next slide if I can. And this is where I wanted to dive into exactly what positive impacts we can have. So we know that there is that really strong bidirectional relationship. What happens in the gut is affecting the brain. What happens in the brain is affecting the gut. What can we do about this exactly? So what things are in our control that can help improve our stress response? This is where my area of research comes into it a little bit more. So what I study is something called prebiotic fiber. Everyone raise their hands if you've heard of something called prebiotic fiber before. A few people. Nice. And hands up, who knows the difference between dietary fiber and prebiotic fiber? Okay, great. This is good. So essentially there is a difference between fibers that we have in the diet and a subset of those fibers, which we call prebiotic fibers. So essentially, not all fibers are created equally. The fiber that's found in broccoli is very, very different from the fiber that's found in sweet potatoes or in beans, legumes, onion, or garlic. Every type of fiber containing plant has a very unique profile of fibers that it contains. And to boil it down really simply, there's two main categories of fiber that we look at. There's the one that most people are familiar with. This is the stuff that, would give granny to help her go to the toilet. It helps bulk up stool. It keeps the digestive system moving really well. It's sort of like the broom moving through your system. It sweeps everything up, keeps the digestive tract moving really nicely. And that's really useful, right? Like that's a really important type of fiber. But there's a second type of fiber that's equally, if not more important, and that's called prebiotic fiber. And your prebiotic fiber, it's found in things like onion, garlic, artichoke, leeks, oats, green bananas specifically. So it's in a very much more specific and refined group of foods. And what separates prebiotic fiber from other types of fiber is that it's broken down by our friendly gut bacteria. So our body cannot break down and cannot digest fiber of any sorts. Essentially, fiber travels throughout our digestive system, makes it to our colon, usually the very end part of the colon, which we call the distal colon. And there is where we have the largest collection of gut bacteria throughout our body. In fact, we have more gut bacteria in our large intestine, in our colon, than we do people that live in Scotland. So there's a whole lot of bacteria that live there. And when we feed ourselves, things like garlic, onion, all of those amazing prebiotic fibers, they make their way to our colon and they're broken down or fermented by our gut bacteria. It's their favorite food. It's the only thing that they like to consume. So they break it down, and as part of that eating, that digestion process, they produce a really important substance, which is on the right-hand side of this screen here, which is got a funny name called SCFAs, which essentially stands for short-chain fatty acids. I'm sure that not many people have heard of this before because it's not particularly, talked about that often, but short-chain fatty acids are a really important substance. They are a really important anti-inflammatory molecule that helps keep the gut environment nice and healthy. It feeds the cells of our gut lining. So when I was talking about that gap earlier, that leaky junction between cells, short-chain fatty acids actually make sure that that gap is minimized. So the chances of leaky gut are much smaller. Interestingly, short-chain fatty acids also can synapse onto important receptors that line the gut, and these are called vagal afferents. Essentially, there's this really long nerve projection that runs from the brain to all of your important organs in the body. That's called the vagus nerve. The vagus nerve is deeply embedded around the gut lining, so that when we do have, a healthy production of SCFAs, we know that they can synapse onto that vagus nerve and communicate signals to the brain within seconds, really rapidly. And this is one of the key driving mechanisms which we think fiber can have an effect on things like stress, on mood, anxiety, even things like cognitive function and memory, which is a completely different talk. But to boil it down, when we consume fiber, and what I haven't put here is prebiotic fiber, when we consume a diversity of those prebiotic fibers, we're feeding those friendly gut bacteria. And by doing so, they produce these really important byproducts called short-chain fatty acids. And that's sort of the center of all of the research that we've been doing at Myota is how can we optimize short-chain fatty acid production? What effect does this actually have on gut health? And most importantly, what are the secondary effects that can have on people's ability to deal with the stress of everyday life and to help regulate themselves in moments of heightened stress? So that sort of brings me on to the final point that I wanted to talk about today. And then I'm going to open up for more questions because I really want to dive into this in a lot more detail. But if I can go to the next slide. So this is the top 6 things. Actually, I think I saw a question in there, which was how much prebiotic fiber does the average person need on a daily basis? This is a fantastic question. There is a difference between what the guidelines are for total fiber intake. So the NHS recommends that we consume 30 grams of fiber a day. And that includes both of those fiber types that I was talking about, the ones that help sweep through the digestive system, but also includes those prebiotic fibers. There have been recent guidelines that came out recently around what we should be aiming for in terms of prebiotic fiber intake. And that was roughly 5 grams a day of prebiotic fiber. To give you a bit of context, a whole garlic, that probably contains 5 grams. But I don't know anyone who's consuming, like 20 cloves of garlic in a single session. I think that would probably be a mistake. So while it does seem like just a very small portion of that 30-gram recommendation, it's actually harder than you think to get from food alone because it is in such specific types of foods. This is why diversity is so important in your diet. I think I've seen another question around the difference between prebiotics and probiotics, which is another fantastic question. Essentially, probiotics are the live bacteria that you're ingesting. So usually on, a probiotic supplement or on a fermented food, they have the word, contains bifidobacterium strains or lactobacillus. They're the names of the actual bacteria that you're ingesting as part of that, either that food or the supplement. What we know about probiotics is that they don't often have long-lasting effects in the gut. They often have very transient effects, so they can improve things like motility or help normalize stools if you have something like constipation or diarrhea. But the effects of probiotics are actually very, very much short-lived. On the other hand, the prebiotics, that's the food for those live bacteria. So instead of, and this is sort of like a concept shift that we've had recently, is that people are now moving from giving yourself a probiotic supplement, which is the live bacteria, to moving to something where it's more like, instead of adding the bacteria, let's just feed the existing ones that we have. And by definition, prebiotics only feed the beneficial gut bacteria. So the beneficial ones are the ones that break down the fiber. So not only are you increasing the population of beneficial ones, but you're not promoting the growth of harmful bacteria at the same time. I hope that was a good example. The other metaphor that I like to give people is think of your gut like a zoo. So you've got many different types of animals in your zoo. You've got lions, zebras, elephants. Think of those as your, all of the species that are existing in your gut. But a lion has a very different diet from a zebra, from the elephant, from the birds. They all require very different diets, like a steak or, some plants. If you were to take a probiotic, it's kind of just like adding in more animals to your zoo. You're just adding in more zebras, more lions, but you're not giving them the food that they need. So they're all kind of like starving in that zoo environment. Instead, you've got all your animals in there. Let's feed them with a diversity of different types of foods, ones that will let those bacteria thrive. So it's not only about the quantity of fiber that we're having in the diet, but it's also about the diversity of those types of fibers that you're having as well. Okay, I'm going to stop here because I wanted to sort of put a question to the group. What gut health things do you think can improve stress resilience? And I've talked about one of them in a lot of detail already, so you'll probably guess the first one. But any other things that people, have had a benefit from in the past, probiotics could be a really good example. But yeah, anything that comes to mind, I would definitely welcome anyone's ideas or suggestions. I'll give you the first one. The first one is fiber, is prebiotic fiber. Any other things that people have experienced that can improve stress through improving the gut? Yeah, we've got prebiotic fiber. Love that.
Eating like regular meals,
Yep. Meal timing.
not like skipping.
Hydration. Yes. Hydration is very, very important, particularly as you're increasing your fiber intake, which can ironically slow things down to start with. Kefir, love that. Fermented foods, tick. I think that's sleep well. Yes, 100%. All right, shall we reveal the answers? Exercise, yes. I think we've ticked off a lot of them, I think. So these are not a comprehensive list, but these are the 6 pillars that we often talk about when we're talking about how to improve our gut health that also has effects on stress. As many of you suggested, fiber is obviously one of those ones for the reasons that we've already discussed. Fermented foods, that's another really promising area of research. So things like kefir, which I think was mentioned, kombucha, sauerkraut, all of those live cultured foods, they are really important in terms of promoting that healthy gut microbiome environment. Even if it's short-term effects, it's still providing a really healthy gut environment. We also have seen emerging research to show that consuming these fermented foods can have a really positive impact on that vagus nerve connection. So particularly on stress outcomes as well, which is great. The thing to look out for on your fermented foods, if you're going to Tesco thinking, okay, I'm going to load up on my yogurt, on my kefir, the thing that you should look out for is that they actually list the bacterial strain that they're including in it. So you want to see something on the label which says with added live cultures, and even better than that, they might even suggest the actual strain that they've included. So as long as, you know, your yogurt says with live cultures, you're good to go. The other thing to note around fermented foods, specifically things like kefir and sauerkraut, is that you want to choose the ones that have sort of been refrigerated. So if you're looking in Tesco, there's often, you know, the section where it's, you know, just room temperature sauerkraut or kimchi. They often have had other things added to them which allow them to be room temperature stable. Those things also make it so that the live bacteria often don't survive that process. So when choosing your sauerkrauts and your kimchis, look for the ones in the refrigerated section of the supermarket. Or you can make your own. So kombucha, fun to make, relatively easy to make, cheaper than the stuff that you can buy at the supermarket. Same with things like kefir, which I haven't made myself, but I've heard that it's also quite easy to make as well. So they would be my top tips. The third one is omega-3s. So we know that there is a very strong and robust body of evidence supporting the role of omega-3 fatty acids. So they come from your salmons, mackerel, all of the oily fish. But if you don't eat fish, they also come from things like walnuts and chia seeds as well. So you can get them from plant-based foods too. And essentially, these are the really healthy fatty acids that support a really healthy functioning brain as well, which then have secondary effects on stress, which is really nice. They're the top three food-related things. The three bottom, which I think we covered 2 out of 3 of these in the chat. The one that I love is forest bathing. So we know that if you were to go for a walk in a forest, then you have exposure to trillions of different natural microbes in the environment. And we know that even just being in a forest, even if you're not exercising, that has shown to significantly reduce blood pressure in people and also to improve stress responses. So I would say if you do have access, which seems like a lot of people do have access out their windows to some trees and to some sun, if you can find yourself a forest, even spending, you know, like 1 walk a week in a forest has been shown, demonstrated in research to improve microbial exposure in a really positive way, lower blood pressure, and improve stress. The other one was movement. So we know that there's also a bidirectional relationship between exercise and movement and the types of gut bacteria that you have. So if you're a runner, or, you know, you do a lot of endurance or aerobic exercise, we know that you have very different types of gut bacteria than people who do no movement whatsoever. And they're often bacteria that break down and produce short-chain fatty acids, which you should know by now has a really important effect on stress and the brain. So it doesn't have to be running, it doesn't have to be cycling or aerobic exercise. It can essentially be anything. It can be, doing some yoga, going for your walk, bonus points if it's in a forest. Anything that is getting the body moving will encourage the growth of really beneficial gut bacteria. And the last one, which is going to come as no surprise to everyone here, is meditation, breathing, relaxation. That has a bidirectional relationship with your gut microbes as well. So the more you're able to relax, to do something fun, have a hot bath, read a book, anything that relaxes, that actually has really positive effects on the type of gut bacteria that thrive in your gut as well. So it's not just having a direct impact on stress, it's also having an indirect impact on your gut health, which again impacts your stress. I think we got most of those, which is great. Everyone knows their stuff. I think the only last thing that I wanted to talk about was a really specific example of how we're taking all of this research and putting it into practice at Myota. So if I can go to the last slide. So this is something that we've been running at Myota since about October last year. So at Myota, for those of you who aren't familiar with us, we specialize in prebiotic fiber. As you can tell, that's why I'm so passionate about the topic, specifically around extracting prebiotic fibers from different types of food sources, specifically artichokes, potatoes, resistant starches, bananas, all different types of prebiotic fibers. And we have that as a supplement. And what we're trying to do at Myota is to show in a clinical trial whether if you were to consume this prebiotic supplement, and we give them quite a hefty dose, it's around 10 grams a day. If we were to give you 10 grams of prebiotic fiber every day for 12 weeks, do we begin to see a improvement in things like stress, mood, anxiety, inflammation, and also your gut bacteria as well? So we take stool samples in this study. So this is kind of a plug for the study to be like, if a friend or a colleague or anyone is remotely interested in the relationship between the gut and the brain, and your age between 18 to 50 years old, we would love you to take part in our study, and we are actively recruiting for people to take part in our study. Essentially, what it involves is visiting our central London clinic twice over a 12-week period. Once at the very start, where we take a sample of your blood, we get you to do some measurements and some surveys. We also make you do a stool collection at home, so not in clinic, obviously. And then we give you the supplement for 12 weeks, and we ask you to take 10 grams a day in your coffee, in your tea, however you'd like to have it. And then you come back at the 12-week endpoint, and we look at the same things again. We look at your gut microbiome, we look at your blood markers, a whole range of things to see, what's changed in your body over that 12 weeks. So please, scan the QR code, have a look at what's involved, and if you do have anyone who lives in the London area that you think could be interested, we're always looking for people. The hardest part of running a clinical trial is actually getting people to participate in clinical trials. So the more that I can sort of reach out to different groups of people is really beneficial for us. So I want to leave it there. I know I can see a couple of questions in the group. Judy, what's the best way to do this? Is it to...
Yeah, we can go through them. There was a few earlier as well. Yeah, do you want me to read them out?
Yeah, if you just so I don't forget anything.
Yeah. So someone said, does the SCFA work similarly to the leptin?
They do actually have overlapping functions. So leptin is the gut hormone that makes you feel full after a meal. There is a little bit of evidence for short-chain fatty acids to be able to synapse onto. Now, everyone don't get too excited because this is very early research. It can actually synapse onto receptors that are stimulated by GLP-1. And I know that a lot of people are excited by GLP-1s at the moment for, the weight loss medications that are out there. Short-chain fatty acids do have a role in influencing things like appetite and how full we feel after a meal. So yes, to some degree, but it works in a slightly different way.
Thanks. Hopefully that answers your question. And then the next one from Shazia, I hope I pronounced the name right. How beneficial is it to take things like Actimel or sauerkraut?
Very beneficial. I love that. Yeah, I definitely would say taking the yeah, taking the fermented foods in like the whole food format rather than taking them in a capsule is beneficial. Largely because if you're having something like kefir or kombucha or Actimel, I think is the yogurt, isn't it? Yes, all of that will have a diversity of different bacterial strains rather than just, one or two that have very specific use cases. But no, I think yes, absolutely very beneficial.
Amazing. And then another one from Susanna. So interested to know if cycling is a helpful type of movement. Is this a good position for the gut as it's more constricted and doesn't involve stretching?
Yeah, so there's actually been a lot of research to show that cycling is beneficial for the types of gut bacteria that you have, which is mostly around that, that aerobic exercise, promoting an environment where, those gut bacteria can thrive and produce more short-chain fatty acids. In terms of the gut being constricted, I mean, I think that will largely be dependent on the individual. I know some people where if they go out for a long cycle, then actually their gut transit time can increase. So it does promote more regular bowel movements. Whereas for others, depending on the way that your GI tract is sort of arranged, potentially less so. So it's hard to tell. But overall, net massive positive effect of cycling for sure.
It's really interesting. And then Caitlin's asking, so do diagnosed disabilities, mental or physical, make you ineligible for the study?
So we do have some inclusion and exclusion criteria for the study. If you do scan the QR code on this page here, it sort of asks you to go down like a whole list of questions, and you can sort of like tick and see whether they're included or whether they're not. The unfortunate thing about research is that they often make you have a really detailed eligibility criteria, and that's often sometimes really, really frustrating for people. So I would say scan the QR code and you'll see the full details.
Nice. Is this the same with, so are there any restrictions with taking part, so medical conditions? I guess that answers that question.
Yeah, they'll all be listed as well. Yeah.
And then, so the upper age, is it fixed to 50? Is that the limit?
Unfortunately, we do have specific studies where we're looking at above 50 years of age. So we had 2 clinical trials recently looking at 50 years and above, but we've actually recently finished those ones. So we should have the results out relatively soon. But for this one, it's the 18 to 50 year age gap.
And then another question is, which days would you have to go into the London clinic?
Any day. So we have spots available from Monday through to Friday. Unfortunately, we don't do weekends, though, is the only restriction there.
And then another one from Desmond. So what is your view on colonic irrigation?
I'm not a huge fan, largely because if you are flushing, particularly with you're flushing a lot of liquid through the colon, often that wipes out a whole lot of the gut bacteria that you have, the good guys, as well as the bad guys. And essentially what this means is that you are wiping out all of those beneficial short-chain fatty acid producing gut microbes in your system. There is also some concern around like different clinics that do colonics and the different safety concerns around those. So I would say do investigate if you are having one. I would say do investigate it further. I don't often recommend them because the benefits don't outweigh the potential risks.
Crazy. I think that is all the questions in the chat. Does anyone else have any questions? Oh, David's got his hand. Yeah.
Yeah, just wanted to say thanks, first of all. I thought I knew quite a bit about gut bacteria coming into this, but I have learned quite a lot more as well. Is there anything else? I know you just mentioned colonic irrigation as potentially being negative for gut bacteria, but is there anything else that would have a negative impact, whether that's diet or anything else?
A few things. So, and I'm a big fan of antibiotics. You've got to take them when you've got to take them. But antibiotics is another example where it does wipe out the good and the bad guys for obvious reasons. Um, so whenever you are, requiring antibiotics, I often prescribe people a specific probiotic supplement, which is the one time that I ever recommend a specific probiotic supplement, and also the prebiotics as well to sort of restore that gut microbiome diversity to the system after antibiotics. In terms of diet, the good news is that in some ways you can also like quickly repopulate your microbiome if you've had, like an infection or antibiotics or something that's sort of wiped out the system. We have seen in research that you can repopulate your microbiome even within a few days. So that's kind of the positive message for it. There's also some research to show that artificial sweeteners in foods can potentially change the composition of your gut microbiome. But again, I would say there's not enough evidence yet to sort of, restrict that one Diet Coke that you're having. I think everything in moderation is fine. But yeah, very, very good question.
Thanks, David. Another question from Caitlin is, are the gut teas any good?
The gut tea. Oh, again, I would say there's very limited evidence to support the effect of gut teas on the microbiome specifically. So I would say not that I know of, and I would say the evidence isn't particularly robust in that space just yet.
And then, so Desmond said, sorry, the benefits are enormous. I've been doing the colonics for 25 years. And then said, antibiotics set you up for candida by wiping out your good bacteria.
Agree on the antibiotics front. I mean, colonics is definitely a personal decision as well. And I'm talking from a gut microbiome perspective. Potentially there's other benefits that it can have.
Sorry, quick question for me. So what prebiotics do you recommend for someone taking antibiotics, or is there is there a specific they go with?
All about diversity. So the more different types of prebiotic fibers you get, the better. So including, many different sources of onion, garlic, leeks, artichokes, beans, asparagus, as many different types as possible will be beneficial.
And Lynette Sauce, I had a bone infection, was put on antibiotics for 3 months long term. The doctor did say to Actimel every day.
Yep, great. Love that. There is a specific probiotic strain that has a lot of benefits to it, which I can share with people later if they're interested. They're the ones that are recommended to have during antibiotics as well. But yeah, fermented foods definitely going to help.
And then Russ asking, any evidence this approach benefits IBS patients?
For IBS specifically, that's an interesting one because people with IBS often need to watch what types of fiber they consume. Some prebiotic fiber can be a little bit too intense for their gut if you're having it all at once. There are specific types of prebiotic fibers that are better for IBS. And we've done a lot of research at Myota to create a product that is beneficial for IBS people. So it is very individual though. Some people with IBS can tolerate onions and garlics, other people cannot. So unfortunately that will be a very individual response. But yes, in general, prebiotic fiber, even for IBS, is going to be extremely beneficial.
Amazing. I'm just sorry. We'll take the last 2 questions. So how do you manage your gut health with laxatives?
the exact same principles still apply, if not even more so. I think having a really beneficial diet, stress management, movement plan, forest bathing, all of those things are going to be equally, if not more important when you're taking laxatives, just to make sure that things are moving well and that you're still feeding your beneficial gut bacteria with everything that they need.
Amazing. And I've seen this twice, sorry, and I missed it earlier. Is coffee good for the gut?
Do you know, this is like an area of research that I actually don't know a huge amount about. There are polyphenols in coffee. There are other really beneficial effects of coffee on things like, cognition, on different areas. On the gut, I think watch this space because there's a whole lot of research that will be coming out around coffee and the gut. I'm a big coffee fan, so I'm inclined to say yes. But yeah, I don't know a huge amount about that at the moment, to be honest.
Well, thank you so much. I think this has been really insightful for all of us. I've learned so much from this webinar. So thanks for your time, Caitlin. And
No
if anyone
worries, so
has,
glad to be
yeah, if
here.
anyone has any questions, feel free to either email Caitlin or email me, and I can forward the questions over to Caitlin. There's a few more things on the chat. Yeah, thanks so much. I wanted to remind you about our website. So there's a purple paper specifically done by Myota. So feel free to log on the website and have a look at that. And then for those of you interested to become mental health champions, I'll also drop the link in the chat at the end. You're also invited to our next webinar, which is on the 20th of May, looking at leading with humanity. So it'll focus on small everyday actions that shape how people experience work, leadership, and support. And then if you enjoyed, please leave us a review. And just to remind you about the resources that are available in case you need any. Thank you so much for today. Hope you guys enjoyed the webinar.
Thank you. Thanks very much.